down. It's in writing in the shop, but I don't remember exactly offhand. I know the first section is verses 1 through 5, and that deals with final exhortation of the saints. Well, that's chapter 5. Verses 1 through 5 deal with rich people and the warning against hoarding. Does the Bible condemn people who are rich? I've answered that one enough. Surely you know. No, nowhere. Nowhere does the Bible condemn being rich. Solomon was probably one of the richest men that ever lived. David was extremely wealthy. And there are many, many others. Abraham owned thousands of flocks. Job was one of the richest men that lived in his time. So the Bible nowhere condemns, if God has given you money, nowhere does God condemn him blessing you. So it's not wrong if God gives you money. But it becomes wrong when money becomes our God, our motivator, our determinant factor in everything. And so in verses 1 through 5, he gives a warning to those that are rich. Verse 1, go to now. In other words, pay attention, set up, take notice. Ye rich men. How rich is rich? How much money do you have to be rich? Yeah, $1 more. One more dollar. I used to think that, in college I made $1.70 per hour. I know that doesn't sound like much. It wasn't. My dad retired at $7.25 an hour when he retired. And people were back then making $8 and $10 an hour. And Dad used to think, wow, $10 an hour, they're rich. But what is rich? If you have $100,000 in bank, is that rich? If you have $500,000 in the bank, is that rich? Can you judge riches by material things? Yeah, you got the answer very quick. I know people, have known people that lived way below the poverty line, but they were richer than most billionaires. Because riches is really a thing of the mind. If I make, we'd have a hard time living on $1.70 now. But if I made $1.70 and I was, what is it Paul said? Having food and raiment, let us therewith be content. You can be content with virtually nothing. Very, very little. In fact, some of the happiest people I know probably would qualify for, below the federal poverty line, and yet they are rich in many ways. But he's specifically talking to people that are rich materially. These are rich people who abused their wealth. It's not wrong to have wealth, but it is wrong to abuse others. Because of the abuse of their wealth, chapter 1, howl for your miseries that shall come upon you. In other words, God is going to judge you. God is going to judge you very possibly in this life, but for certain in the next life. And instead of gloating about how much you own, You should be grieving, crying, wailing, and in sorrow for the judgment that's coming. Verse 2, your riches are corrupted, your garments are moth-eaten. How many of us, we don't have any real young ones tonight. You're the youngest couple here, so. How many of you remember putting clothes in a closet and moths getting in and eating them? What did we do to prevent moths from getting in and eating our clothes? Mothballs. And you could tell somebody that used mothballs a block away because their clothes smelled like mothballs. But they, the reason for that, and by the way, if everybody stunk, nobody stunk. Does that make sense? If everybody smells the same, you don't notice anyone else. But moth, which is one of several things, that can literally eat up and destroy clothes. Now, rich people would often invest their money in rich apparel. Kings had royal robes that they wore, and they were decorated. They had crowns that had diamonds and all kinds of jewels in their crown. Their clothes would be of the finest material, and even rich people, would invest a lot of money into clothes. They had so many they couldn't wear them all. And so they would hang them up. I just had a thought. They would hang them up. And they didn't have air conditioning. They didn't have constant temperatures. And so they would hang them up so proud of what they owned. And the moths would come in and eat it. And their clothes would be worthless. Their riches are corrupted. The word corrupted is the idea of corroded. Now he talks about, in verse 3, he talks about rust, and we'll get to that in a second. But their riches are corrupted. How many of us, and I know some, I'm sure some of you probably do, that inherited either the lottery, or their parents left them lots and lots of money, and that was the absolute worst thing that ever happened to them. Their money corrupted them. They didn't have banks. We tried to keep, I think it's about $100 or something, in a safe place, because if the banks, if the electric goes off and you can't get to the bank, we've got enough money that we can buy groceries to last us a week or two. I think it's around 100, which probably wouldn't go very far, but we keep it in a very safe place so that if we do need an emergency, we've got it. But how many of you would keep $100,000 in your clothes closet? Don't have $100,000, but if I did, how many of us would put it and just say, I'm going to put it in a shoebox, and I'm going to put it here, $100,000, I'm going to put it in a shoebox in my closet? Not very many. We would take it to the bank or get a lock box at the bank. We would lock it up, do everything we could to protect it. Nowadays, we have what's called FDIC. If you deal with the bank, I'm sure you've seen that. FDIC is federal deposit, insurance, something or other. But if you have your money in a bank and the bank goes bankrupt, the federal government will give you your money up to, is it 250 now? Yeah, I'm nowhere near that, so I don't know. But they will. They didn't have that. If you lost your money, it was gone. It was over. There was no insurance. There were no safety deposit boxes. Much of their wealth was material possessions that they kept at home. Remember when Abraham bought the field and the cave to bury Sarah? You know, it's like, how much do you want for that cave and that field? Oh, about 400, what was it, shekels or something? Oh, okay. $400. Kathy left me a couple dollars. I am rich. I want to go out and eat after church. Let's see, 400 shekels. 1, 2, 3, 4. They carried it with them. They had it in their tent. They carried it, and Abraham was very wealthy. But he carried it with him because there was no place else to carry it or to put it. Remember the rich fool in Luke chapter 12. His ground brought forth an abundant crop. Instead of saying, God has blessed me, how can I use this to bless others? He thought only of himself. Wow, I'm going to tear down my barns. I'm going to build bigger barns. I'll have enough grain to last the rest of my life, and I can eat and drink and be merry. And God called him a fool, and he died that very night. But putting grain in barns was how they stored their wealth. They couldn't take it down to the market and sell it and walk out with a check. You got 5 barns full of wheat. Wow, you're rich. You got 5 barns full. But because of their abuse of their money, their wealth was being lost to circumstances beyond their control. Now, I was not around during the Great Depression. My parents were, my grandparents were. I have heard some stories about the Great Depression. People that had money in the bank lost every penny. They didn't have FDIC back then. People lost every penny. I remember when we were cleaning out some of Dad's stuff, he kept an old trunk downstairs. And growing up, we were never allowed, we dare not touch that trunk. So when he died, my brother and I opened it up, and it was mostly full of pictures that we have no idea who they were. You know, there were no names on them. But as we funneled through some of this stuff, we found, I don't want to insult anybody, but they were ration coupons. Yeah, we found a whole bunch of ration coupons. This coupon is good for 1 pound of sugar. This coupon is good for 1 pound of flour. And the government would issue these certificates, and you could take them down to the store somewhere, and you could buy whatever that certificate was for. My dad had a whole stack of those. I don't know why he didn't use them, but he didn't. You got a bunch of them? I had never seen one. I had heard about them, but Dad actually had a bunch of them that he had kept, he had saved. You know how much they were worth today? Or when Dad died? Zero. They were worth a pound of sugar, a pound of flour. They were worth a pound of this, a pound of butter. They're worth absolutely nothing. The word corrupted means basically, in verse 2, rotten or spoiled, moth-eaten. We've already covered that. In verse 3, their gold and silver was cankered, which means corroded. Can gold rust? No. Gold and silver will not rust. They don't oxidize. But he said in verse 3, your gold and silver is cankered, and the rust of them shall be a witness against you. This is where, Brother Schultz and I had a lot of conversations about this. You know, in 1611, when the Bible was initially translated, words had a set meaning. Over time, those words changed meaning. I've used the one in Acts about Easter. You know, in 1611, the word Easter meant Passover. That's what it meant in 1611. It's not that it was mistranslated. It's just that the English word has changed. We think the word cankered and rust means what we think of rust. You know, Joey's not here, but how many of us remember Joey's old truck, his old one that he had years ago? You remember it? We often joked and kidded, rust was the only thing holding that truck together. If you had ever tried to lift it up, the body would have lifted up and everything else would have remained. Gold and silver do not rust like that, but they can become tarnished. They can become corroded in a different sense. I'm told that being stored in a damp place can actually turn them dark so that they become dark that resembles rust, which makes them far less valuable than they would have been. When I was up in West Milton, we had a lady that never had children of her own. And so she adopted Kathy and I, and then when we had kids, she adopted them as her grandkids. So we would check on her a lot. When her husband died, she couldn't drive, couldn't do much of anything, so we were there a lot. But even before her husband died, let me back up, I'm getting ahead of myself. We were visiting one night, and her husband said, I want to show you something. It's like, okay. He wasn't saved, so you never knew what he was coming up with. So he took me aside and opened a drawer and pulled out this cigar box and opened it up, and inside the cigar box, he had a collection of silver coins, pure silver. And it's like, I don't know what they're worth, but he looked through and he found one coin, and he told me what was unique about it, but I don't remember. But he had one coin that had a letter missing. He said that one coin is worth a fortune. I thought, well, you know, he was known to exaggerate some, but apparently, you know, the silver, and he told me, and I've asked others, if it is untouched, unused, uncirculated, in mint condition, it's worth a lot more than a coin that you found going through your piggy bank and said, oh, here's a coin. Unminted is worth a lot more, because once they get dirty, once they get worn, once they get used, they lose a lot of value. I still wonder how much that set was worth. After he died, I moved away. Brother Randy Titus followed me. Brother Mark Clark Sr. followed him. And next thing I know, she didn't have any kids, so it would have been her nieces and nephews were all staunch Jehovah's Witness. So they snuck in, took care of her, got her to sign the house and everything over to the Jehovah's Witness. And it's like, oh, Gertie, what were you thinking? But money, even gold and silver, loses value if it becomes tarnished or it darkens. If you get it clean, it's going to take a lot of work to clean it if you get it clean. And then after that much cleaning, it won't be worth nearly as much as it was. But these rich people were hoarding it instead of using it for the service of God. The rust, and we'll stick with James's word, was a testimony that they had been saving and saving and saving and saving and hoarding, because it would not have rusted had they kept it in use. You know, it's like, hey, I know you just, you were in a bad wreck. I know you lost your job. I know you can't work. I've got $100,000 in gold coins. I'm going to give you enough to buy groceries for a week, and I just use that as an illustration. But no, it's like, well, and the Old Testament talks about this a lot. I gave one verse in Ecclesiastes there, but they were using it, but not for others. They were hoarding it, saving it, storing it, hiding it, until it became tarnished and wasn't worth much. But I like what Ecclesiastes says. Yea, I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. And who knoweth whether he shall be a wise man or a fool, yet shall he have rule over all my labor, wherein I have labored, and wherein I have showed myself wise under the sun. This is vanity. Several years ago, I was introduced to a book, and I'm not arguing, it's got some merit. But this, and I forget who the author was. It wasn't Dave Ramsey. It was one of those other guys. He was saying that before you die, or in your will, that your money is given to charities or churches that you know to be sound and dependable, instead of leaving it. And by the way, if you do not have a will, guess who determines where your money goes? Government gets to decide. If you don't have a will and you die, the government gets to decide who gets what, how much, and so forth. Which is another reason I encourage everyone to at least have a will and say, this is my solemn declaration of my desires. We don't have any kids that I don't like, but let's say one kid was an alcoholic, a thief, a whoremonger. He is the worst of everything. And my other two are responsible. They're frugal. They manage well. They're faithful to church, faithful to God. If I don't have a will that says, I don't know what the state minimum is. It used to be 500. I don't know if it still is or not, but it used to be, I think you had to leave a minimum 500. Why would I want him to get a third of everything I own so he can go out, get drunk, spew it all over the place? But without a will, the state can say he gets equal share of everything. Just throw that in free of charge. Verse 4, behold the hire of the laborer who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth, and the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. Now, I put this in there because if you've never read it, you probably don't know this verse exists. Deuteronomy 24:15, Moses gave commandment. This is a commandment. You hire somebody to work for you. You pay them at the end of that day. That was the law of Moses. Thou shalt give him, and at his day thou shalt give him his hire, neither shall the sun go down upon it, for he is poor, and setteth his heart upon it, lest he cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be sin unto thee. In other words, if somebody works for you, y'all never paid every day, did you? Most places are every week, every 2 weeks. I worked for a place once that paid once a month. But it was, we will pay you on the last day of the month. And so you knew the last day of the month, I'm going to get my wages for that month. If it's weekly, bi-weekly, I know I'm going to get my wages. But they were keeping it. Oh, it's sundown. Oh, you worked all day. I'm supposed to give you a pence. Well, I'll give it to you later. I don't have it on me right now. No, God took care to make sure that hired hands were taken care of that day. At the appointed time, they were taken care of. But they were withholding their servants' money because even today, have you ever overpaid a company and asked for a refund? Has anybody ever done that besides us? I don't know about you, but you know what they did? They held it and held it. Boy, they want their money. If you owe them, they want it right now. But if they owe you, the longer they can hold on to it, the longer they can invest it, and the more they make. They were holding on to it, keeping it, and saying, I'll get to you later, I'll pay you someday. The Bible also talks about pay that which thou owest. You owe somebody, you pay them whenever you agreed to pay them. But the greed came before God, and because of their greed, their cry of the workers entered into the ears of God, and God paid the rich people back. Verse 5, ye have lived in pleasure on the earth and been wanton. You've been joyful. The word wanton is joyful, happy, living it up, so to speak. You've lived in pleasure. You've lived it up. You've enjoyed life. You've nourished your heart. Ye have condemned and killed the just, and he doth not resist you. In other words, they were cheating, lying, anything they could do to make a buck, and they really don't care about you. I bring this up because I have done it many times over the years. By the way, did you all know, you probably don't, police officers, you probably know this. Police officers, they get somebody out on the interstate, they pull over, they question them, and they verify, and I told them for my money, they better verify that this person really truly is homeless, or they really truly have not eaten in days, and they really truly are hungry. Most police officers I know will take them up to McDonald's, Burger King, or someplace and buy them a meal. Did your brother ever do that? Yeah. Yeah, we did that too. But sometimes the police officer would take out of his pocket and put them up in a motel for the night. And I told him, I said, call me, I'll split it with you, we'll do something, but I want to have a hand in that. But these people were like, you haven't eaten in a week, tough luck on you, buddy. You should go out and get a job. Well, sometimes, well, you can't, there's help wanted everywhere today, but sometimes people do need a hand up. And these rich people were, like Proverbs said, like Ecclesiastes said, they were so interested in hoarding it for themselves that they never used one penny of it to help anyone else. All right. Now, I put down there, is James forbidding saving? No, I think we made that clear. But just as God cares for the servants, He also cares for the animals. And I am not a tree hugger. I am not an animal lover. I watch people on TV, dogs licking all over their face, and it's like, oh! I am, but I'm not that way.